You beg for relevance by giving attention freely. In power games, generosity is surrender. The one who withdraws gaze controls value, tension, and survival. You were taught that attention is politeness, that responding quickly makes you reliable, that listening endlessly makes you virtuous. That belief has already cost you leverage. Attention is not a social courtesy, it is a transfer of value. Every time you look, reply, explain, defend, reassure, you are allocating psychological capital. And most men spend it like loose coins in the street. In any hierarchy, value flows towards scarcity, not effort, not sincerity, scarcity. When you give attention freely, you signal surplus. Surplus lowers price. Low price lowers status. It is that simple. You think you are being mature when you over-communicate. You think you are being confident when you show constant availability. You think you are being secure when you clarify everything immediately. What you are actually communicating is dependence. Dependence on being seen, dependence on being understood, dependence on being validated. Predators smell dependence faster than weakness in posture. Look at any power structure, corporate, political, social. The most powerful individual in the room does not chase engagement. He does not over-explain. He does not flood the air with reassurance. His attention is measured, directed, withheld unless strategically deployed. Why? Because attention determines psychological gravity. Whoever chases attention orbits. Whoever withholds attention becomes the sun. You have been orbiting. The modern world conditions you to be reactive. Notifications, messages, comments, endless micro-demands on your focus. Each one invites you to prove your relevance by responding. And you comply. Instant replies, paragraph defenses, emotional reactions. You think responsiveness equals dominance. It equals submission. Reaction is surrender of frame. When someone can trigger your response on demand, they own your nervous system. And if they own your nervous system, they own your positioning. Machiavellian strategy is not about cruelty. It is about control of perception. And perception begins with visibility. The man who is always visible is always measurable. The man who is always measurable is predictable. And the predictable man is containable. Containable men do not rise, they are managed. You mistake attention for connection, but attention is more primitive than that. It is closer to territory. When you give attention, you expand someone else's territory inside your mind. They occupy space, they influence mood, they dictate timing. You check your phone because they might respond. You replay conversations because they might misinterpret. You adjust behavior because they might withdraw. Do you see the inversion? You fear their withdrawal. They never fear yours. This is why attention is not kindness, it is power allocation. In war, ammunition is rationed, not because it is evil to shoot, but because waste guarantees defeat. Your attention is ammunition, yet you spray it at strangers, at women who have not earned it, at employers who barely respect you, at friends who use you as an emotional sponge. And then you wonder why you feel drained. Drain is not random, it is the tax paid by the over-available. Scarcity creates tension. Tension creates curiosity. Curiosity creates pursuit. When you remove constant access to your attention, you create psychological friction. People begin to measure their words. They become aware of the possibility of losing your engagement. Loss aversion is stronger than attraction. Humans do not chase what is kind, they chase what can disappear. Your mistake has been believing that value is proven by effort. In reality, value is inferred by selectivity. If you answer everything, you are accessible. If you engage everyone, you are common. If you explain yourself repeatedly, you are seeking permission. The sovereign does not seek permission to exist. He decides where his gaze lands. He decides who receives his time. He decides which provocations deserve silence. Silence is not insecurity, it is filtration. When you withdraw attention, you are not being rude, you are establishing boundaries of psychological territory. Most men fear being misunderstood, so they overcorrect. They clarify endlessly to avoid conflict. But conflict avoidance breeds invisibility. The moment you stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you, the power dynamic shifts. They either escalate to regain your reaction, or they retreat. Either way, you regain center. Understand this clearly. Attention is not neutral. It amplifies whatever it touches. If you argue with a manipulator, you strengthen him. If you defend against a liar, you legitimize him. If you respond emotionally to provocation, you reward it. Withdrawal starves manipulation. The discipline is not emotional, it is strategic. It requires restraint under provocation. It requires watching without reacting. It requires allowing tension to sit unanswered. Most men fail here because their ego craves closure. They want the last word. They want clarity. They want relief. Relief is the currency of the weak. Power tolerates ambiguity. When you can sit in silence while others squirm for your acknowledgement, you reverse the hierarchy. They begin performing for you. That is the lens shift. Attention is not a reflex, it is a weapon, and you have been handing it out for free.
There are only 3 types of men in the attention economy: the addict, the performer, the sovereign. Most men are trapped between the first two. The addict survives on reaction. Notifications regulate his mood. Replies validate his existence. Silence destabilizes him. He checks his phone not for information, but for reassurance. When attention arrives, he relaxes. When it doesn't, he spirals. He mistakes stimulation for connection. He believes frequency equals importance. He over-explains, over-texts, overexposes. He cannot tolerate ambiguity, so he fills every silence with noise. His nervous system is externally controlled. The addict does not withdraw attention because he fears invisibility. He believes that if he is not constantly seen, he will be replaced. And often, he is. The performer is more advanced. He understands that attention has value, but he still chases it strategically. He curates himself, crafts responses, manages impressions. He withholds occasionally, but only to increase applause. His silence is theatrical. His absence is designed to provoke reaction. He is not addicted to attention, he is addicted to admiration. The performer plays the game well, but he is still playing for approval. He adjusts his persona depending on the room. He calibrates tone to maximize praise. He measures himself by engagement metrics, social, romantic, professional. He looks controlled, but he is still orbiting. Because the moment validation drops, his behavior shifts. His restraint is conditional. His withdrawal is temporary. He returns when he feels ignored. Both the addict and the performer share one weakness: they need the audience. The sovereign does not. The sovereign understands that attention is not something to farm, it is something to allocate. He does not chase reaction. He does not manufacture mystique. He does not perform detachment. He simply does not require constant visibility. His identity is internally stabilized. Silence does not threaten him. Being misunderstood does not terrify him. Delayed response does not create anxiety. He does not rush to clarify himself because he does not depend on consensus. That is the distinction. The addict reacts instantly. The performer reacts strategically. The sovereign reacts rarely. Rare reaction builds gravity. When the sovereign speaks, it carries weight because it is not constant. When he withdraws, it is not punishment, it is filtration. He does not explain his silence. He does not announce boundaries. He enforces them quietly. This is where most men fail. They attempt withdrawal, but they signal it emotionally. They become cold to provoke response. They delay messages to trigger anxiety. They try to simulate sovereignty. Simulation leaks insecurity. True withdrawal is indifferent. The sovereign does not withdraw to manipulate. He withdraws because not everything deserves engagement. He understands a brutal truth. Every reaction is a form of submission. When someone provokes you and you respond emotionally, they have moved you. When someone questions you and you rush to defend, they have positioned you beneath judgment. The sovereign does not defend himself in low-value arenas. He allows misinterpretation to exist. He allows tension to linger. He allows others to project. Projection reveals more about them than explanation ever could. The addict seeks resolution. The performer seeks admiration. The sovereign seeks control of his internal state. Control of internal state is the highest leverage. Because once your emotional equilibrium cannot be hijacked, your attention becomes selective by default. Selective attention creates hierarchy. Notice how people treat the addict. They test him, they push boundaries, they delay responses because they know he will wait. Notice how they treat the performer. They admire him, but they still evaluate him. He must maintain standards to keep their interest. Notice how they treat the sovereign. Cautiously. Because uncertainty surrounds him. He does not reveal need. He does not chase closure. He does not scramble to repair perception. Scarcity of reaction makes others measure their behavior. The sovereign becomes the evaluator. This shift is subtle but absolute. When you stop reacting automatically, people begin calculating before speaking. When you stop giving reassurance freely, people begin qualifying their access. Hierarchy forms around emotional restraint. The addict bleeds attention. The performer invests attention. The sovereign owns attention. Ownership means you decide when energy moves. You decide when silence stands. You decide when engagement is warranted. And most importantly, you are prepared to let interactions die without chasing resurrection. That is the line most men cannot cross. They fear loss more than they desire leverage. The sovereign accepts loss as filtration. If someone leaves because you reduced access, they were feeding on surplus. Surplus attracts consumers. Scarcity attracts contenders. The discipline of withdrawing attention transforms you from supply into gatekeeper. But to become the sovereign, you must be willing to watch opportunities fade without scrambling. Few men can endure that. History does not remember the loudest men. It remembers the controlled ones. Power has never belonged to the most expressive. It belongs to the most contained. Look at rulers, generals, corporate architects, political tacticians. The common pattern is not charisma. It is restraint. Their presence is deliberate. Their words are measured. Their silence is calculated. They do not flood rooms with validation. They let rooms adjust to them. When presence becomes rare, its impact multiplies. In court politics, the advisor who speaks last often shapes the decision, not because he talks more, but because he waits, he listens, he withholds, he observes the emotional temperature before entering it. Scarcity sharpens authority. When a leader is constantly available, he becomes operational. When he becomes operational, he becomes ordinary. When he becomes ordinary, he becomes replaceable. Rarity creates symbolic weight. Think of the executive who rarely responds immediately. People do not interpret it as incompetence, they interpret it as priority filtering. His delay signals hierarchy. Delay creates perceived demand. Contrast that with the man who responds within seconds to every message. He signals surplus time. Surplus time implies low demand. Low demand lowers rank. This dynamic is primitive but consistent across human systems. In social hierarchies, overexposure erodes mystique. When people see too much of you, your moods, your opinions, your frustrations, they begin mapping you. Once mapped, you can be predicted. Prediction reduces threat, and reduced threat reduces respect. Predators in nature do not announce movement. They remain still. They study. They strike without emotional noise. Their power lies in patience. Human predators operate the same way socially. They observe who reacts impulsively. They test who over-defends. They measure who needs validation. The one who reacts fastest becomes the easiest to manipulate. Scarcity of presence forces recalibration. When you withdraw predictable engagement, people reassess their standing with you. They question assumptions. They measure their own behavior. Now the evaluation has shifted. You are no longer being assessed. They are. Throughout history, influential figures controlled access carefully. Kings did not grant audience freely. Elite circles required qualification. Restricted access reinforced status. Access is privilege. Privilege implies hierarchy. When you give unrestricted access to your attention, you flatten hierarchy. You become equal in urgency to everyone. Equality in urgency destroys positioning. This applies in relationships as much as politics. The partner who is constantly available becomes predictable. Predictability erodes polarity. When one person is certain of constant access, effort declines. Effort declines where scarcity disappears. Human nature does not reward constant reassurance. It rewards tension resolution. If there is no tension, there is no need to invest. This is why over-availability breeds complacency. Presence that is too frequent loses edge. Now consider silence. Silence is misunderstood by insecure men as weakness. They believe not responding immediately signals fear. In reality, controlled silence destabilizes those who depend on reaction. When someone attempts provocation and receives nothing, their tactic fails. When someone attempts to bait you into defense and you remain neutral, their leverage dissolves. Withdrawal exposes motive. The one who needs your reaction becomes visible the moment.
Discipline is not emotional distance. It is behavioral control under provocation. Tactical withdrawal is not disappearing randomly. It is measured disengagement applied with precision. It is the refusal to reward low-value behavior with high-value attention. Most men withdraw incorrectly. They vanish dramatically. They announce their silence. They weaponize absence emotionally. That is not strategy. That is reaction disguised as strength. True withdrawal is subtle. You reduce frequency. You delay non-essential responses. You stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. No speeches, no declarations, no visible resentment, just controlled reduction. The first principle of tactical withdrawal is response timing. Immediate response communicates priority. Delayed response communicates filtration. When you do not answer instantly, you are not playing games, you are signaling that your time is structured. Structure implies hierarchy. Hierarchy implies value. But timing alone is not enough. Tone must shift as well. Remove emotional overtones, shorten responses, eliminate defensive explanations. Speak with clarity, not intensity. Intensity reveals investment. Neutrality reveals control. When someone tests you through provocation, passive aggression, disrespect, the instinct is to defend.
Defense is a reflex. Reflex is weakness. Instead, respond minimally or not at all. Silence forces recalibration. If a person escalates when you withdraw, you have identified dependency. If they retreat, you have identified opportunism. In both cases, information is gained. Withdrawal is reconnaissance. The second principle is selective engagement. Not everything deserves your energy. Not every message requires closure. Not every misunderstanding demands correction. Men trapped in approval-seeking believe they must maintain harmony at all costs. They rush to fix tone. They smooth tension. They apologize preemptively. This behavior trains others to expect emotional labor from you. Stop providing it. Let tension sit. Tension reveals hierarchy. The one who rushes to relieve it is beneath the one who can tolerate it. The third principle is attention rationing. Limit how much of your internal state is accessible. Do not broadcast mood shifts. Do not narrate your frustrations. Do not expose every intention. Opacity creates psychological distance. Distance increases perceived depth. People respect what they cannot fully map. When you reduce oversharing, you prevent others from predicting your reactions. Predictability invites manipulation. The fourth principle is non-reactivity. Non-reactivity is not suppression. It is control of visible response. Internally, you may feel irritation. Externally, you remain composed. Composure disorients manipulators. Most social strategies rely on triggering emotional spikes: anger, guilt, insecurity. If the spike does not appear, the tactic fails. You do not fight every battle. You remove the battlefield. The fifth principle is exit readiness. If an interaction consistently drains you, reduce exposure. If disrespect persists, disengage. If manipulation escalates, withdraw entirely. Not dramatically, quietly. Exit without performance. Most men threaten to leave to provoke reassurance. That is negotiation from weakness. When you leave as a tactic, you reveal attachment. When you leave without announcement, you reveal sovereignty. Tactical withdrawal is not about punishing others. It is about preserving leverage. Leverage comes from optionality. If you cannot walk away without emotional collapse, you have no leverage. If you must respond to feel secure, you have no leverage. If you fear being replaced, you will overcompensate. Optionality requires internal stabilization. You must become comfortable with temporary loss, comfortable with silence, comfortable with ambiguity. The moment you can tolerate ambiguity, you stop overcorrecting perception. Others begin adapting to you. Silence as strategy works because most people are impatient. They crave reaction to confirm relevance. When they do not receive it, they increase effort. Effort reveals priority. When someone increases effort to regain your attention, the hierarchy has shifted. But this discipline requires consistency. Sporadic withdrawal signals moodiness. Consistent restraint signals structure. Structure commands respect. You are not becoming cold, you are becoming filtered. You are not becoming distant, you are becoming deliberate. Attention is no longer a reflex, it is a decision. And decisions define power. You cannot practice disciplined withdrawal while secretly craving approval. Technique without identity shift collapses under pressure. The real obstacle is not your habits, it is the version of you that needs to be chosen. The needy identity is subtle. It does not always beg, it negotiates, it rationalizes. It tells you that clarity is maturity, that over-explaining is integrity, that constant availability is strength. But beneath all of it is fear. Fear of being replaced, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being insignificant. As long as that fear governs you, you will leak attention. You will respond too quickly. You will defend too intensely.
You will pursue closure when silence would give you leverage. The needy identity cannot tolerate uncertainty because it ties self-worth to external response. If they reply, you feel stable. If they retreat, you feel threatened. That dependency makes you manageable. Manageable men do not control dynamics, they adjust to them. Killing the needy identity is not emotional numbness, it is detachment from outcome dependency. You stop needing a specific reaction. You stop requiring reassurance. You stop chasing resolution. You accept that some doors close without explanation. Some people misinterpret you permanently. Some opportunities vanish when you reduce effort. And you do not scramble. This is where most men fail. They understand the strategy intellectually. They try silence. They delay responses. They ration attention. But when tension builds, they crack. They send the follow-up text. They clarify their tone. They attempt to restore comfort. Because the old identity whispers, fix it, don't lose this. The sovereign identity says, if it requires chasing, it was never aligned. Replacement begins with internal hierarchy. You place your standards above your need to be liked. You place your emotional stability above your need to be validated. You place long-term positioning over short-term relief. Relief is seductive. Sending that extra message gives temporary peace. Explaining yourself reduces immediate anxiety. Reacting feels powerful in the moment. But each time you do it, you reinforce the old identity. Identity is built through repeated behavior. If you repeatedly tolerate silence without reacting, you build tolerance. If you repeatedly walk away from low-value dynamics, you build optionality. If you repeatedly allow misunderstandings to exist, you build indifference to perception. Indifference to perception is lethal in social hierarchies, because once you no longer fear how you are seen, others cannot control you through image manipulation. The needy identity is obsessed with narrative control. It wants to be understood correctly. It wants to ensure fairness. It wants mutual clarity. The sovereign understands that fairness is irrelevant. What matters is leverage. Leverage grows when you are willing to lose. When you are willing to let someone walk away because you reduced attention, you are no longer negotiating from scarcity. Scarcity inside creates surplus outside. This is the inversion. The more you detach internally, the more others attach externally. But this requires ego death. You must kill the version of you that measures worth by responsiveness. Kill the version of you that panics when messages go unanswered. Kill the version of you that feels powerful only when constantly engaged. That identity was trained by environment, by culture, by digital conditioning. It is not survival-oriented. Survival in competitive hierarchies demands composure, selectivity, restraint. When you become comfortable being temporarily forgotten, you become unforgettable in long-term positioning. Because now your attention is rare. Rare things are guarded. Guarded things are respected. The final shift is simple but brutal. You stop trying to be chosen. You become the chooser. You stop reacting to every stimulus. You become the filter. You stop proving value. You let absence create it. This is not about isolation. It is about sovereignty.
Understand this before you mistake technique for transformation. Scarcity amplifies whatever you are. If you withdraw attention without internal substance, you do not become powerful, you become irrelevant. Silence does not create value, it magnifies perceived value. If there is nothing behind the curtain, scarcity only delays discovery. Many men learn the mechanics of withdrawal and immediately misuse it. They become artificially distant. They delay responses without direction. They attempt to manufacture mystique. But emptiness cannot sustain gravity. When scarcity is not backed by competence, direction, and standards, it collapses into avoidance.
Avoidance is fear disguised as strategy. You must be building something while you are withdrawing: skill, positioning, strength, resources, discipline. If you reduce attention but increase nothing internally, you shrink. Scarcity works because it implies demand elsewhere. If you withdraw and your life has no movement, the illusion fades quickly. People sense when absence is intentional versus when it is insecurity. The sovereign withdraws because he is focused. The insecure withdraws because he is wounded. The difference is invisible at first, but obvious over time. This is your final warning. Do not use silence to manipulate outcomes. Use silence to protect standards. Do not ration attention to trigger obsession. Ration attention to preserve hierarchy. If you withdraw hoping they chase, you are still dependent. If you withdraw because alignment dropped, you are sovereign. Intent defines power. There is another risk. When you stop reacting, people will test you harder. They will escalate. They will attempt provocation. They will attempt emotional hooks, because your withdrawal threatens their previous positioning. When a man who used to over-engage becomes selective, the dynamic destabilizes. Those who benefited from your surplus will try to restore it. Expect discomfort. Expect silence in return. Expect distance. Expect replacement attempts. This is filtration. If someone only valued you when you were accessible, their departure is not loss, it is correction. But do not confuse isolation with elevation. Withdrawal without contribution turns into social decay. The goal is not to disappear. The goal is to control engagement. Engage where there is reciprocity. Withdraw where there is exploitation. Remain neutral where there is testing. The elite operate on selective exposure. They are visible when strategic, invisible when unnecessary, engaged when aligned, silent when provoked. You are not becoming antisocial, you are becoming disciplined, and discipline creates separation. Most men will never do this consistently. They will relapse into over-communication. They will chase reassurance. They will panic under ambiguity. If you maintain composure where others crave reaction, you move into a minority. Minorities define standards. Standards define hierarchies. Your final shift is simple. Attention is no longer given to feel connected. It is given to reinforce alignment. When alignment breaks, attention withdraws. No speeches, no drama, no explanation, just recalibration. In a world addicted to noise, silence becomes dominance. In a world begging for reaction, non-reactivity becomes authority, but only if it is backed by internal strength. If you cannot stand alone without scrambling for validation, this discipline will feel unbearable. If you can, you will notice something shift. People speak more carefully. They invest more effort. They hesitate before testing, because you are no longer predictable, and unpredictability, when controlled, is power. You now understand the discipline. What you do next determines whether you remain common or become rare.